mhm. Da, 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 da. There's Jessica and Catherine. Hey, Miss Jessica.
Hello.
Pretty good. How about you? Did you get some new glasses or something?
I've had these, but I got my fancy chain on today.
You had a chain. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it looks like your glasses were different. Yeah.
Um, Sometimes I wear my pink ones.
Oh. Wow, wow, wow. That's fancy too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get started? Because this should be a lively conversation. There are some very interesting things that we should um, discover today. Hold on a second here. Okay. Okay. So I wanted to like dig into how we perceive things, and I kind of divided between um, emotional and rational. Okay, so there is a school of thought uh, that we can't really understand things except through our emotional selves. Okay. Um, where you fall on this, maybe we'll discover today. You may already have decided how you fall in, on this kind of discussion. But I think it's worthwhile exploring just how we put our universe together. Okay, because I think it will inform us as to how we are taking in information, especially when we think about our human connection. Okay, because we often approach things in one of those two ways without regard to the balance that might be useful. And I'm not sure, I'm going to leave it up to you and to discover what is important to you. So I whether I propose something or not, the bottom line here is actually I don't know, which is good for you. And I'm still struggling with myself as to which is better for me. And I change from time to time. So whatever I say, just keep that in mind. The caveat is I really don't know which is better even for me, let alone for you. But I know that I have realized that there are the two things, and they tend to invariably overlap. There is even a school of thought that we can't even know or be aware of a rational thing without some emotional content or impact or connection to it. The idea goes that if we don't care at all about a thing, if there's no sense of caring about it at all, then we tend to ignore it. It tends not to be something that we can keep track of, even if it's introduced to us. That unless we have some kind of emotional connection to it, it doesn't register. Then there's the other part of us that when we when we are emotional about something, if we don't have some kind of rational context to put it in, it also gets lost and often goes off the rail. It's like whether it's love or hate or any of the easily and frequently visited emotions, that unless we have some kind of, let's say, box to put it in, some kind of rational construct, it tends to go off the rail, you know, whether it's, love and just love unconditionally. And you say, yeah, well, even unconditionally, that's a rational thing. But let's say it goes really past that, just like whatever. Then you can find yourself like keeping a body in the bathtub, for somebody that, or something like that, so love, even love has to have some kind of like rational context to put it in, I know that some of the guys that I deal with in the prison are there because of love, not to mention hate. It's like you love somebody, so you can't say that to my sister, boom, you're dead, or you hate somebody and just get rid of them. I just don't like him. I just don't like how you look, so you can see how like they kind of invariably overlap. So today I would like to engage you in a conversation about that will help to explore, even if you have it clear, it may help the rest of us to explore how you think in your rational self and your emotional self, and how you balance the two. Okay. This could be a very deep and revealing discussion. So let's begin with a question of definitions, about definitions, because to me, all meaningful conversations begin with definitions. And even if I don't agree with how you define it, at least I know you define it that way. So it isn't, this first question isn't about some universal definition or a true definition. It's really about your definition. So I want to ask you first, how do you separate the difference between an emotional impact or a response or a feeling and a rational thought or feeling? How do your emotional self from your rational self, what can you say about it? Even if you don't have like a canned definition, talk to me a little bit about the difference between your emotional self and your rational self. Anyone?
Well, I mean, for me, and this is on the rational side, it's a little more, understandable and by definition for me, because I always just think of rational as being the like root cause analysis or if I can figure out how A, plus B equals C or whatever, I can get back to the thing that causes something, and that is a functional tool, then it's like rational. That's the, kind of in the forms of using logic to get to answers. Whereas emotional is more of the experiential, how I experience things, whether it's, it's more internal, but it's experience. It isn't necessarily trying to get to cause, but more of like, the moment or, where it's easy to say feel, but it isn't necessarily just feel. It's how you kind of find yourself at the now sort of way. It seems a little kind of, up in the clouds, but the now part of that, experiencing the now is really an emotional thing. You aren't trying to figure out what it is so much as just, experiencing things that maybe aren't visible, but are real because of how you experience them. This is, of course, that's like, I don't know, that may be a bit of an academic approach to it, but working in a company full of engineers, let me tell you, I deal a lot with the rational and they become very emotional when I try to move it into my realm.
I can imagine. Anyone else? Catherine?
Lawrence, I'll jump in, and Todd, that was really interesting because I would almost phrase them opposite. Yeah, I'm thinking that for me, the rational is, I can put on paper that you can see in a spreadsheet format. It's right now. Where emotional is, if I do this today, how will this impact 6 months from now? This student, this person I'm working with, that kind of thing. So very interesting. I was really all geared up to hear just the opposite. So thank you, Todd, because that was insightful.
No, that's awesome. And I think you get to something that's really good, is that it isn't even that we're talking about different things. We're talking at the same thing. It's how we operate as people to what, we're dealing with. That's so definition, like Lawrence is great at this of getting defined, because then you can have a discussion from there. But I love that, because I think that's absolutely true. It's one of those things when you get in a discussion sometimes, and by discussion, I mean heated argument or just flat out, shouting match or something. A lot of times, yeah, you're actually on the same side. You get down to it, it's like, oh yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages of defining terms, is that we become a little bit more clear on what the other person is saying. Even if we disagree with them, that's not nearly as important as like, okay, what are you really saying? Because often, most often, people don't look up words, most of the words that they use in a dictionary. So that, and that's even the dictionary is just like, they're just reporting on what most people think that they mean when they say that word. So it's important to like start with, okay, well, when you say that word, what do you mean exactly? That's useful. Anyone else, how you experience or define the difference between your emotional self and your rational self, or emotional reality and your rational reality?
I don't know if anyone else relates to this. Sorry, echo. I have a difficult time separating them. My brain loves to apply ration and logic to everything. Well, why am I feeling that way? So I'm always trying to put facts or logic behind a feeling. So those are difficult for me to is that a feeling, or why am I feeling it? So it's hard for me to separate.
So can you give us an example, Jessica, of something that that you are aware of that difficulty in separation?
Well, let's put it to feelings. I'm trying to think of an example that would be pretty general for everyone. A feeling you have towards another person. Maybe when you enter a room and that person's in there, you're always excited. You're glad to see that person. So in my brain, I'm like, well, if I'm going to analyze it, am I excited to see them because we always talk about topics that are interesting? Am I always excited to see them because I know that they are going to share something positive with me, or do they affirm my beliefs, or whatever. That's how I think about, when you ask me to think about my feelings, why does that person make me feel that way?
Yeah. But by the way, are you guys getting some kind of strange growly noise?
A little bit every so often.
Okay, all right. I think it's our Zoom connection is bad. Okay, but if somehow it finally crashes on us, try to log back in, because usually it'll go out and come back up because they've recognized what the problem is, and reboot their system or something. But just wait for about 30 seconds or something, and then just log back on. you know, okay. All right. So that was very interesting, Jessica, and a good example of like how like our first impressions or even and continual impression may have some, let's say, emotional grounding, or it may come from an emotional place. But then if we try to apply rationality to it, like, or try to understand that feeling, so you have an overlapping of the two, if I'm getting you right.
That's a fair way to explain that. Yep.
Okay. Good, good. Okay, anyone else?
I'm
A-
on late.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm on late because I just got in on the tail end of it and I just heard Jessica's saying, and it's giving the definitions or which influences you more. Was that the question you were debating?
Yes.
Okay,
Like,
okay.
no, actually, yeah, just kind of defining how you the difference between how you experience
Oh,
your
oh.
emotional reality and your rational reality.
So it's more of a definition.
Right, right.
Well, then the other thing I was going to say yesterday, I had this class for an hour and a half on kind of really studying the brain and the different parts of the brain. And there is a very, very special part, and I don't remember all these names, but what happens to us emotionally has the biggest impact on our memory because we hold it in this special part of the brain, like everybody knows where they were on 911, for instance.
Mhm.
But also that connects with passion. When you have passion for something and you are discussing it, that comes out. So I do think we have to be aware that both play a place, but I know as far as the definition, I agree that we all have a kind of a different feeling of what definitions are. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting how Jessica brought that out.
Mhm. Thank you, Lee. Anyone else? How you know, anything that you can contribute to our collective understanding of how our emotional reality differs or complements or interacts with our rational reality. Anyone else? Well, while you're thinking about it, I just want to throw in that I experience it by my galvanomic response, so to speak. If something causes me to breathe different, or my heart rate to change, or this feeling of tightness in the chest, or of a feeling of relaxation, or a feeling of, as Jessica put it, excitement, or the hair to raise on the back of my neck, or something like that, I count that as an emotional response, okay, to stimuli. So if I read a book, if I'm reading a book, for example, and I find myself getting more tense or more relaxed, or I find myself laughing or smiling or something like that, I recognize that as an emotional response to stimuli. On the other side, if I become analytical usually about the emotional response. If I find myself moving the blocks around to see how they fit, you know, if I start doing cost benefit analysis, or if I start looking under the hood of something, so to speak, then I count that as a rational response to stimuli, right? So if I read a news article, I have two different responses. One might be an emotional response by what is going on, that emotional thing that will cause me to read the story. And then in connection with that somehow, I will start to reflect on what caused that, who's involved, what do I think of that person's opinion, how does one thing that they say correspond with something else that they said, how does the story conflict with or complements or is somehow useful to some other body of knowledge that I am aware of. You know, those kind of things, I count those as rational responses to stimuli. Okay, so that said, anyone else have an idea or something they can contribute to our ideas about the difference between our rational selves, our emotional selves, our rational response to stimuli, etc. Well, hearing none. Okay. Okay, we could. Crystal, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah,
Uh,
good morning.
Okay.
Good morning.
Go ahead. Oh, is that
Okay.
it?
No, I was just gonna say, dare I get in this conversation?
Yes, absolutely.
So I was thinking about that, and one of the examples that I was thought about when, lately, like the past month or so, I've been starting to watch that old TV show All in the Family, Archie Bunker.
Hmm.
And I remember watching it when I was younger, when it was out. And watching it now is a little different. It seemed like when I was younger, I was a little maybe more angry as even though it was like a sitcom, but they covered a lot of very serious issues in Archie Bunker. Everything, racism, just everything. So now that I watch it, I kind of get a good laugh out of it. And I kind of understand Archie Bunker's thinking and kind of understand that, there are a lot of Americans that probably think like Archie Bunker, and it seems like nowadays, with the way things have gotten, it's become more, if you are like an Archie Bunker type guy and you have those feelings, though it's okay, but you might people tend to keep them a little bit more secret nowadays, because there's so much backlash on social media. But I mean, he stood up for what he believed in, and he, even though he seemed a little simple at it, but that was just who he was. So when I think about my own emotional, I think most of my decisions are based on emotional, like 80 or 90% at first, because I do what drives me, or what, if I read a story, if I'm in a conversation, if I'm contemplating, helping somebody and trying to find answers. First, I know I hear the story, then I get emotional, and then I have to stop and think about, okay, yeah, that did happen, but what are the deeper issues? Like, say, I saw a very disturbing Facebook video on one of our elders was being abused right on Facebook. And this was yesterday, it came out. And at first I was very angry about it. I am still angry about it, but the man who did the abusing was a veteran. And so then I had to think and stop and think, well, does he have PTSD that he would act like that he would yell out and say those things? And then I had to think again, is it's still not right. So, it just kind of like, it was a great example of going back and forth with my emotions and then my trying to be logical thinking about it. Because as a leader in my community, I've been getting a lot of calls about it and people are saying, something needs to be done. What can be done? And so, I have to put emotional and logical feeling into play. And with situations like that, it's not easy because there's so much, that so many, so much that it involves just making, my own decision about it. And I guess that kind of comes down to when I think about either, just most of my emotions are emotional, my feelings. And then even when I'm reading books, reading stories, I can't really connect. Plus I'm a Pisces. I think that has a lot to do with it. I'm like, oh, I'm a Pisces, so I'm really kind of not wishy-washy, but I feel those emotions like a water sign. But so I think that has a lot, but there's just so much, it's never just like concrete. It's never black and white, like, oh, it's either emotional, it's either logical. But I think in order to make good decisions, we have to weigh them both. Because I think I would say emotional always outweighs the logical, like in my own thinking, but then so I'm aware of it. So I have to bring that scale up so that it's like, okay, yeah, your emotions, but you got to think about this logically, look at that whole big picture and be able to think of a decision, or if you're making a decision or a choice on something. And yeah, I guess in the end, it just comes down to, what I believe, how I see that picture, and the answer decision, can I live with it? I think that's the main thing is, can I live with that decision? So is that kind of what you were?
Yeah. Good,
Yeah.
excellent. And by the way, I'm glad you said you're Pisces. That explains a lot about you.
Yeah. And then the color charts, I think I'm blue.
Yeah. Exactly. Jace, I think you were going to say something.
I agree with Crystal.
Are you Pisces too?
No, guess what I am? Can you guess what I am?
I don't know. I figure Scorpio.
No, you'll never guess because I'm on the cusp. I'm a Leo on the cusp.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. I'm a very complex person. No, I was thinking along the same lines of Crystal. Like I'm more emotional, but I'm getting more emotional as I'm getting older too. I hate to say that, but because I think that you go through a lot of experiences, so you hopefully have some more compassion as you're moving through life. But I found that I kind of go by the teachings of the traditional elder teachings, that they talk about seeing with the eyes of your heart. So I have a tendency to go that route. And, I think of the words of John Fire and Frank Foolscrow and others who have asked us to look deeper into situations and not so much on the surface, and not just, the rational things of what they look like and what they are saying, but, deeper. And so I don't know, I think that if the times that I have not listened to my heart, and used my own personal intuition and my own thoughts, knowing myself, gotten me into trouble. I've done things that I probably shouldn't have done because I didn't listen to my heart. And I even do that when I am giving talks and so forth, that something tells me, whatever it is, tells me to share this with others. And so, and if I don't do it, then I feel bad that I didn't share that. But if when I do share it, it's like some affirmation, like a elder way in the back of my mind or back in our genetic memory is saying, yes, that's what we wanted you to share with the people. So that tells you right there, that's not sounding very rational, does it? It sounds more emotional and thinking about how you're going to, work with people and so forth. So that's, Grandpa used to always say, also, Grandpa Fool's Crow, look in me, not at me, because I love all people. And certainly that is, an emotional feeling that he cared for people. And, he used those traditional values of compassion and wanting to get to know people on a more personal and I think, heartfelt way. So that's kind of when I think of emotional, I think of listen to my heart. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Very important contribution. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is very interesting discussion today because this is so important that we as humans become aware of what we are using when we are discussing with other people or why people do certain things. For instance, if they've said something that hurt you, would you say they must be having a rough day? Trying to understand other humans helps us to separate us as human beings from animals that don't make those decisions because those reasoning powers aren't as complex as ours. And having said that, it helps you understand yourself more. Like, why did you make that decision? Did you do it on impulse? Did you take enough time? Did you think things through? If you had regrets, why do you suppose you made that decision? Just a better understanding of our whole part as humans and how that plays an important part. And looking at yourself, have you had a traumatic experience, which I just had a recent one, and it does affect your cognitive thinking and recognizing it and then how you handle it is your own doing, but just that knowledge. Great discussion, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that you hit the kind of nail on the head, so to speak, Lee, because that is really the crux to why this discussion is important. Because when we become aware that we have these two sort of competing parts of ourselves and how we perceive the universe, one, we can take better advantage of it because we can say, okay, that's that emotional feeling that I'm having, and that may not take in all of the considerations because emotional, that's one of the weaknesses of the emotional self, is that it does a lot of heuristics. And by heuristics, I mean, it cuts off the corners of thinking. It doesn't really do fine detail. It does real block kind of thinking, if you will. So it doesn't take into consideration what that person might have had some traumatic event in their life, or they may be sick right now and not capable of doing something that I needed them to do, but are too embarrassed to say that because then I would ask questions about their illness, which they're not ready to talk about. All kinds of things. The emotional self usually doesn't do all of that. You know, it does almost like digital thinking, on, off, like it, don't like it, you know, feeling good about it, don't feel good about it. Then the rational self can start to parse it out. this discussion, by the way, is not a new one. As far back as I can find people writing about humans, there has been that discussion about, almost a kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing, that part of the self that responds emotionally, and the part that responds rationally. And sometimes it's posed into the good angel and the bad angel kind of thing, but it always is this warring between what we feel and what we think. And my observation is that humans are feeling beings that think, not thinking beings that feel. And every time I'm looking at some conflict, that has guided me in evaluating what I'm seeing better, is by saying, okay, what are they feeling first? When I can think of it, trying to discover what is that person feeling before I ask, what are they thinking? Because chances are whatever they think has been molded, framed, and constrained by what they're feeling, So that said, let's talk about some of the cost benefits of emotional constructs or approaches to problems versus rational. Not that one can be 100% on either side of that, but can we explore what you might think would be cost benefits of either approach? Go ahead, Betty.
One of the costs for me most of my life has been being seen as a fool, because I am basically a very emotional response type of person. And I mean, I say that somewhat humorously, but really it hasn't been all that funny. So I'm really in my present life trying to explore intellectually more before I open my mouth. If I'm speaking really loudly, it kind of alarms me that I am operating from that emotional base.
Can you talk a little bit about some of any anecdotes about I'm sure you have many stories. Any anecdotes about a case where rational thinking helped you, or emotional feeling helped you, or either way?
Yeah, one of the things I have really thought about and read about in recent years is fear, because I had a goal to become fearless. And it has helped me when when I have a resistance to something, or I'm in a situation that usually has to do with an interpersonal relationship, and I don't know what to do. I don't want to mess it up. It helps me to stop and realize that what I'm feeling is probably coming from a fear, and then to look at what I'm afraid of, see if I can find it out, and then approach it. And that really does help.
Mhm, mhm. Yes. Anyone else? Thank you, Betty. That was insightful. Anybody else? What kinds of things or what kind of cost or benefits have you recognized in approaching a problem or a situation from a rational versus an emotional way?
I want to go back to briefly to what Catherine had talked about, because I think that's critical in where you can see value. I mean, obviously balance where they can kind of, your emotional and your rational worlds meet, tend to provide, a lot of times your best outcomes, because you're not, kind of going all internal or all external kind of thing. But it's interesting when you talked about, considering other people's feelings by your potential action. So you're kind of using the rational to kind of predict an emotional, and therefore having to kind of engage emotionally, but using it in a rational context, in a forward-looking kind of situation. Whereas in the reverse, a lot of times I find that some of the worst. So I see that as like a good benefit a lot of times, where you can kind of, I always try to start that, everybody's trying to do their best. If I keep that in mind, I can kind of see, where maybe their emotional response will be to whatever, I'm thinking is right, or what maybe they're thinking right, trying to find something that's, will be satisfying for both people. But in the reverse, it becomes a matter of like justification. And I see that as a bad thing a lot of times, because what you do is you act out emotionally. So it's a lot more internal thing. And then you try to explain why you did it, or in your own mind saying, well, I did that because, I've had this, this makes me angry when this happens, or this. It may tell you why, but it ends up being more of a justification a lot of times. And therefore kind of like, oh, well, then it's okay kind of thing, when it isn't, sometimes, right? As Crystal had talked about there about, seeing something that was upsetting, and you can come to an understanding of why it might be, but it doesn't necessarily justify it. But when you employ that kind of trying to rationalize your feelings, it ends up being more, there's just more danger of it being a justification thing. Whereas when you're considering other people's feelings, it's good to kind of try to, put that, you're trying to rationalize through a solution, and then think, well, how would people react to this? And why would they react to that? You're actually kind of, it's an empathy thing. And you tend to get better results, I feel, when you employ empathy versus trying to internally, justify what you've done. So it's reversing the situation. One is taking, emotional cost and benefit in a rational sense, and trying to figure out how that might be felt or held, where the other one is more like a past action and saying, well, I did this because, or I did this because, you might get to that, but it doesn't necessarily be the best result. And so, I mean, that's a little convoluted in a way, but I think a lot of it is when you look forward and try to take other people's emotions into effect, instead of just a numbers exercise, you tend to get to better solutions. This is something we really tried to emphasize when I was working in journalism, to try to get to that point, just so you could not make it just about numbers, because when it comes down to it, communication's about people. It's not really about numbers or, situations.
Very, very important thing. Catherine?
I'll just add to, I agree with Todd in so many ways. In situations where you're presenting or leading a discussion in terms of trying to persuade others, certainly the numbers are important. The rational is important. But my experience is, sometimes if you have the emotional side, the story that can be carried away and repeated over and over, that's really where the power is. And so I think, back to the idea of the balance, but certainly the power of the story part of it is absolute and just can't be overlooked.
Yes. Somebody else was going to say something?
Oh,
Jace?
well, I was just thinking back on my teaching, and in my career of teaching, and the students that come back to me years and years later, they don't talk so much about, oh, I remember that you shared this statistic about American Indian people, or I remember that. What they do is they say, I really am thankful that you had told us these stories about how, how this situation happened and how, and whatever it is. And it's usually tied to emotion, how I made them feel when I told those stories. So, and that's why I said before, if I don't share that information, it seems like there's something missing. And so a little thing in the back of my brain, I guess, says you should talk about this. So I do. So that has helped me in my life. But I was thinking about the emotional part where some people really, and it has, where they have to, they get crazy, like on the interstate or on the road rage folks. That, I think that's a lot of emotion. That's really negative emotion that has really caused a lot of, you know, we tell our younger people that don't be giving people the finger and stuff like that, because they might, they might try to run you off the road, or and that's sad that we have to share those kind of teachings. But that's scary, because I don't want my loved ones to be hurt on the road, because they're trying to get from one place to another. So that, that road rage is a real negative emotion that happens, especially to us elders. They think we drive too slow, I think, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but we watched them pull up to the same stoplight at the freeway, and they have to wait. They have to wait for us anyway, so we don't care. Well, those are very important and insightful contributions. I can't help thinking that it's important for us to tell our stories, and I think what Jace, and Catherine and Todd were saying really is like, as humans, we have been telling stories for a long time. I remember back where I was in Australia, and I went up to this cave that had been recently discovered, and there was a whole system of them. And there were like these paintings in the cave that they estimated were 10,000 years old, right? And the way they had been put in was they were smoked into sandstone. Was very interesting. And so the smoke had penetrated. So even though that had been wind and stuff, erosion, that the stories were still there, and they were used, apparently, according to the anthropologists who had studied that and who were talking about these, and they were way back. I mean, they were way in the outback. Well, they were way up on the Cape York Peninsula. If it may not mean anything to you, but it was like far away from everybody else in Australia. But what they were saying was they were kind of like PowerPoint presentations of walkabouts, that people had gone on journeys, walking, just by themselves, spending maybe a year or two out by themselves, not talking to anybody, but having revelations. And that was part of the progress from being a young person to being an adult. They were telling the stories of their revelations, and they were telling the stories of their experiences. And they were saying it's like 10,000 years ago, So you imagine that they didn't have, in their PowerPoint presentations, they weren't doing statistics, they weren't doing the numbers. And if they weren't more than they can count on their fingers, that there were two entities, as opposed to there were 2,000 in January, and then in February there were only 19,090. So there was a decrease. They weren't doing, apparently they weren't doing that. Their PowerPoints anyway didn't show that. So that really brings us to, if we are emotional beings, rather more than we are rational beings, because we are rational beings as well. Or we have the capability of being rational anyway, then how do you, first I would say it's important to realize that when we're talking to people, and I say that because it's a new thing for me to try to tell stories, because the stories are what makes it clear more than the numbers. And the numbers can be, and the rational part should be behind the story, at least from my point of view. But I have to recognize that it still has to be packaged in a story, right? And a story that gets an emotional impact, so that the thing I want to say is, dare I say, salient. It makes a point, and is memorable. So that said, how do you balance the two? I think we have some agreement anyway that both are part of humanity, both are part of our experience as humans. But how do you go about balancing the two, your emotional being and your rational being? Or do you? Anybody? Do you have difficulty balancing your emotional?
I think you're asking a question that there is no special spot. Sometimes it's more one way than the other, and I don't think it's a black and white. Just becoming aware of it and what effects might have. I think you have to go, and I really, really want to compliment everybody that mentions storytelling, because that's how I learned about the parts of the heart. The guy was telling, he was a professor, was telling about the parts of the heart. And I tried to do that when I said, like, how many of you remember 911? A story that you could all relate to, I think, if everybody remembers it. But that's storytelling. But I do not think that it can be one way more than the other. And I think all the time that's our aim, is to balance it in a way that is productive to both sides.
Well, I think you make a really good point, Lee, that the first step is just being aware that there are those, we process those things differently, and that we can apply our rational minds to our emotional impulses. I think that is just knowing that there is that possibility. Then after that comes the practice. But that said, I'm interested in how, if there's anyone who has an experience doing that, or a difficulty doing that, and how you experience that trying to make that balance.
Lawrence, I think, one of the key things there is kind of knowing yourself first, because if you're primarily an emotional person, or you see yourself as primarily emotional person, then you're looking for something rational to introduce into your thinking when you're encountering situations that you'll get emotional in, right? So you have to, a lot of times just like recognizing how you see yourself so that you can introduce, work towards a balance. And that's why I started with, for a long, long, long time, I was just super highly rational not engineer like, but more like, I work as kind of like a crisis guy. Crisis, not like a real crisis, but like in newspapers, I was the deadline guy. So when things broke out crazy, then I was really good in that moment, right? But that only works in the crisis, where that rationality. In the reverse, I had to employ what I talked about earlier, which is every time I moved in on something, as far as a topic that might be difficult, I had to say, I have to think about what this means to everybody involved, which is the people in the story and people who are hearing the story. Those are two big things there that, so for a very rational person, that's how I would employ to make sure I had at least some kind of balance, maybe not perfect. And for me, when I flip to the other side on the highly emotional side, which doesn't happen a ton, I can't remember anything what I say. And so, I don't have an answer for that. I don't have that ongoing internal conversation, which I think is so valuable, people have. So I'm really good. So I tend to really kind of still gravitate towards the kind of rational, but employ that tool to always try to consider, the different audiences in the discussion. So, and that's how I do it personally, but I think it starts at knowing yourself and how you need to try to achieve that balance. That's probably the most important thing.
Can I ask how you go about knowing yourself, recognizing that it's one of those kind of ongoing journeys, at least for most people.
And you don't
because-
stay the same either.
Exactly. Since the self is changing, you can't say, well, I know myself and then I knew myself yesterday, but today, I don't know, I'm a different person. Who is that? How do you go about doing that check-in? Because I agree that's the beginning.
Yeah, well, I think, for me, my journey was that I had to listen to others and how they saw me and how people who are honest with me and knowing that they're honest with me. So a lot of times it's like taking the hard truth a bit, from people who are willing to give it to you. And those people are hugely valuable. And I've tried to keep those people, around me in my life just because it's a trusting, you can trust them if they kind of care for you, but also will give you that kind of feedback. And so I got a lot of that from that. And then also, just artificial things like Myers-Briggs tests actually did help me in a big part of my life one time, because I was part of an experiment and they said, you're this kind of person. I said, I've never seen myself that way, but it makes total sense. So, I mean, there's different ways to get there, I suppose. But I mean, I think trusting, friends and family who are willing to be honest with you it's always helped me a ton that way.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're coming up on the end of our journey here, and it's been insightful. I'm appreciative of the contributions that each of you have made, and I hope that the discussion has meant something to you, and that you can find some usefulness going forward in the lives that you're leading. I will also add that I'm in a struggle about this balance between emotional and rational self, because kind of like Todd, I've been kind of like trying to figure it out rationally. And whereas I still see the value in that, I think I have very much underestimated the importance of the emotional being, because I think it helps us make good decisions. I do not think that, but I think it helps us to interact with our fellow human beings, because recognizing that they also see life through these emotional filters, that's important to recognize. And also that I share that with them, to the extent that I have said, okay, yeah, I see where I was angry about that, and that anger shut down my prefrontal cortex, basically. It made it harder for me to process data, because if I could process the data, I would realize that there was another component to how that person was responding that I had not recognized. Okay. So it is in that spirit that I think that I am on a journey of learning how to hear people's emotional content and as something of value, that however I see that, that is them. That's what they're struggling with. And that's important. Even if it's not important to me, it's important to them. So therefore, it's important to me. So I think, yeah, that is the crux of this conversation. And as Lee pointed out earlier in this conversation, just being aware that there are those two things and bringing that to top of mind, I think that is very important. That said, thank you very much for everyone who has participated, and let's see you next week on a brand new show, Bring a Friend. Bye.